Hello and welcome to the Testing Peers podcast. Tonight we are going to talk about how we attract great testers. I'm with all four of the awesome foursome. So I have Russell.
Hello.
Chris.
Howdy.
David.
Hello.
And myself. This podcast is kindly sponsored by Saffron QA. Saffron QA is a provider of recruitment and consultancy services specifically for the QA industry. More details can be found in the show notes. So with that, David, I hear you've got some bants for us.
Yeah, so we're discussing tonight attracting great testers and thinking about the ways that we can be perceived by what we put out there into the can be seen. And I was wondering if we had any examples of something that we've taken a punt on, we thought was a good idea at the time, and it may be a success or it may have been a spectacular failure. So to put it into context, two examples I've got a failure and a success. So often in recipe books, you see the photos of recipes and you think, that looks fantastic. And so when I was younger, one of my first cooking things that I did was I saw a recipe for homemade pesto. And so I got the ingredients, followed the recipe absolutely perfectly, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. It was too much basil and stuff. It was a complete disaster and I had to throw it away in the bin. And then later on, I was making a meal, sort of a date night, and I was making another recipe. And usually I feel that fruit should know its place and shouldn't be seen as a savoury part. However, I saw this recipe and I thought I'll give it a punt. And it was sweet peaches with chard and cheese. And I know that it sounds pretty gross, but actually the bitterness of the chard cut through the peaches, and so therefore it tasted absolutely delicious. And obviously it's quite memorable because I can remember it now. So does anyone else have any examples of successes or failures based on what you've thought of was a good idea?
Interesting. I guess I had a good idea. I mentioned, I think, in one of the previous episodes, I used to like kit cars, and I thought it was running a bit hot, so I thought I'd upgrade the water pump. Shouldn't be too hard, kit car, very easy to sort of maintain, update, and these sorts of things. So I took off the old water pump, bought an upgraded aluminium sort of new water pump, attached it, and then I tightened the bolts too far and sheared it off in the engine. So I snapped the whole bolt off. Didn't go very well, as you can see. So it was my failure rather than success. I then had to take the whole engine out in order to be able to re-drill the hole that which the engine, the water pump was attached to, which I couldn't do. And then I tried to put the engine back, and then I broke the clutch, and it just got very expensive very fast. So that's not a success story. But it was fun. I learned a lot about engines by just trying to do this one water pump. But never mind.
I've got something similar, not the kit car, but a similar almost failure to a similar level, but it's more around my kids and trying to get them into something that I was really into as a kid, like TV shows like Tom and Jerry and stuff. And I'm thinking, that's great idea. I'll get them involved in it and they'll love it and we can talk about it. We can watch it together and all that kind of stuff. And then what happened was it turned them into trying to replicate the episodes with each other to a point where it's like, it's now banned in the house. We can't let them watch it because it incites too much violence between them. And it's my fault because I suggested it because I thought, it's a great idea. I loved it as a kid, so why can't they watch it? But actually, it did the opposite and made them 10 times worse. So yeah, that's one of the things that we now don't let them watch because it incited the violence almost. So that was a failure.
How are you going to show your love of pro wrestling, Simon?
Yeah, I'm holding that one off for a while. I do have a video on my phone of my eldest when he was about 6 months old, sat with me on the sofa watching WWE, and he's babbling away, shouting at the telly. No idea what he's saying, but it sounds like he's enjoying it. And my wife's in hysterics because he's the loudest he'd been at that point where he's not crying. He was just babbling away. The love hasn't followed on since then.
For me, on the spectacular sort of failures on things that I thought were going to be fabulous would probably be along the lines of when I was doing graphic design GCSE. And I had a lot of very artistic and creative friends who come up with some fantastic ideas. And I can think of things nicely, but my hands don't generally do what my brain tells them to do when it comes to sort of creating things. And I had, for my main GCSE product for my project, was to come up with a means to, via post, transport lots of posters I mean, I chose a really exciting topic to do this. And I chose the flimsiest possible materials because I didn't build it till, I think, maybe like 2 days before the deadline of an 18-month project. So everything was just done with drawings and how I was going to market it and what it was going to be called and what its logo was going to be. When I eventually made the thing, clearly it wouldn't pass any testing. It wouldn't go through the post very well. Yeah, it looked really bad, but all the surveys that I got, because the whole class who had already finished all their work went and got as many surveys of feedback from any other students in the class. I got the most surveys completed. So, I achieved something, but the actual product I made was diabolical. Like my designs made it say like, oh, this curvature is going to be robust and strong like the shell of an egg. But, crush it. It was rubbish.
I have just thought of one more, which is probably I'd built up how I was going to propose to my now wife perfectly. I'd got this whole thing set out. I'd planned it. I'd bought tickets for a festival, the O2 Wireless Festival in London. Her favourite band were playing on the main stage, Goo Goo Dolls. And I planned it all that I would, when her favourite song came on, I would get down on one knee, propose. What I didn't account for was that I'd have to order the ring and get it delivered into store. I couldn't just go into the shop, say what size I needed, and they provide me with the ring. So about a week before the event, I'm going to the shop thinking I've got plenty of time. I can go and get it. They'll collect it today. I'll go home again. And they come in and said, that'll be 3 weeks. No, it's next week. I need it next week. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We've got nothing. So obviously I never told my wife beforehand that I was doing this. So I had to literally try and suddenly plan something less spectacular. But it was still a nice romantic walk in the countryside where I waited till we got to a certain point and got down on one knee and asked her, but it wasn't the initial plan. So it was a spectacular failure, but only a spectacular failure for me. Didn't impact anybody else at that point.
So that's a success in the end, isn't it?
Eventually, yes.
So does anyone else have any success stories? We've concentrated on the negatives.
I did notice that, yeah.
We are testers. We always look at the negatives.
Exactly. But we're attracting great testers, so we need to have some good stories.
Exceeding expectations.
Yes.
Nothing that exciting, I must admit. I hate decking so much, I decided to rip out my decking from my house. And I built a raised patio by hand, which I'm quite proud of and looks better than I was expecting, I have to admit. That's probably the positive one, something I did that was better than I expected.
I would say for me, you may have noticed, any of my friends, anybody that knows me, I'm particularly reticent at taking on new and exciting risks and ideas. When people say this is an exciting thing, I kind of go, but what about this thing? I don't want to commit to lots of things very quickly. And that's partly down to historical things, but also I can come up with risks and things that go wrong very quickly with things. And so pretty much every holiday I've ever been on, I haven't looked forward to at all until the moment we've walked into the hotel. Then I've enjoyed it and it's surpassed all my expectations because all my expectations were negative ones. But on a more practical level, I suppose, this podcast, I could see everything going wrong and how stupid we could look and this, that, and the other. But fortunately, there were other people with actual enthusiasm and belief that they could apply to these things. And, it's been a wonderful thing there forward. So you brought better balance to my life. Thank you.
Cool. So let's get to the actual topic of attracting great testers. So what, Simon, do you think we can do to give us context, give us an introduction as to what you think we can do to attract great testers?
So I think this is really all about how we make the role and how we make the company and the team and the culture stand out from the rest of the roles that are out there at any one point. So for me, it does come down to making sure the job spec isn't just full of buzzwords that are meaningless, making sure that you talk about what they will actually be doing. For me, it's also about ensuring there's enough information about what the company does, what the company's values are, making it easy for the prospective tester to find out all they need to find out about the role. So that would be the basics. And then obviously you would then elaborate on that when going through the process.
I think it's always difficult to really express sometimes what the company does. For our company, what we do is so vast that it's very difficult to describe that without buzzwords like exciting and things like that. Then they're so widely used, it sort of goes over people's heads and go, oh, right, that's another company that claims to be the best in the world or whatever. But we do exciting things, and we can't describe it because obviously client confidentiality, we can only show on our website exactly what we are allowed to show, but we do so much exciting things it's difficult to get that enthusiasm across in a job application, because also the job application is, for want of my catchphrase, culture add, not culture fit. Because it's so difficult. It's so difficult to describe what the day-to-day running or what we can actually do in a job advert.
I guess, can you describe, the culture that your teams work within, sort of the atmosphere, maybe the company's policies towards flexible working sort of strategies, and some of the kind of the broader benefits as well as the role items? Because obviously, it does sound like you can't give specific on roles, and often that is hard, because most teams I've worked in, even in their own one product area, you've got big range and asks what you want people to do. So one advert that's meant to recruit 10 people is always going to be a bit of a challenge, where actually sometimes there is some skills you need or something else, but it's particular to that one thing. It's not the broad sweep. But yeah, if we're going for attracting great testers, to me, I think I have to ask the question, what is a great tester? I go back to that kind of point of what you're looking for, and making sure that you attract them with things that you would hope great testers look for. And I'm always kind of looking for the right behaviors, the right skills, but behavior is definitely more important to me. The attitude, the learning, the proactiveness, the drive, they want to do things.
Passion.
Yeah, I deliberately avoided that word.
I know.
It's an episode in itself. I think we've done that one. But no, passion is there, definitely. But it's trying to make sure advert is one of your first pictures that most people will see. As you said, Simon, making it clear, explain what people will do, really important. I'm going to open up another thing, though. I think if you want to get great testers, you need to go before an advert. You need a company with a rep. You want people to come through it. You want word of mouth. You want recommendations. I don't know about anyone on this podcast right now, but how many people have recommended you or said, "Ooh, that's a good place to work. Have you looked at it?" I probably did that with my current job. Some of you might have done it before, but recommendations, how you get people to recommend you, that's where often you get some of the best talent, I think.
Yeah, I would agree to some extent there. I mean, the roles I've had since I left my first job have all been through recommendations of being referred for the role and recommended, et cetera, and going through the motions of not having to apply through recruiters and going through the full search in LinkedIn and all the other stuff to that. So you're right, recommendations is always a good way of getting people in the door that come from a good reputation. I think the other thing for me is companies have to realize now the research that people do before they apply for a job. People do search on LinkedIn, people do search Glassdoor, people do search everything else they can to find out the good and the bad about the company. So let's not hide from that in some respects. Let's put the positive stuff front and center of the spec. And this is where good recruiters earn their salt, and good recruitment team, good talent acquisition teams, because they can build that picture to build all those positives about the company and the culture. And then you just fill in the details about the intricacies that you need within the role. And that's where it's a collaborative effort. It isn't something that we as test leaders can go out alone and go, right, we're going to hire these people. Look at building that team that can work on it together.
I take a couple of approaches when I'm looking at how we can do these things, because I often think about how are other people trying to actively recruit people. So if there are people that I know I respect in the industry, how are they posting jobs? What does it look like? Where can I glean any sort of inspiration? I'll talk to friends, I'll talk to peers, I'll talk to any recruiters I've done. I've spoken to Ben from Saffron QA. Wonderful. I look and see what other people are doing and see what is it about those jobs that appeal to me? What is it that sort of jumps out to me as a tester? I'm not calling myself a great tester, but I aspire to be one. And there are things that turn me on and turn me off about jobs and companies that I work for as well. And when I look at them, if I know a specific industry, maybe I think it's like an ethical grey area or something like that, maybe it has a reputation for exploiting people or making them work extra hours or doing something that I wouldn't be so keen on, I would withdraw from those sorts of things. And then no amount of positive reviews and those sorts of things would draw me in. But the other side of the thing is I would look in-house and I'd say, right, what have we got? And this is going further on to what you've been talking about, David, with your add and instead of fit thing. Because what is it doing that I need? I don't need a clone of myself. That would be awful for everyone.
God forbid.
I need new eyes. I need new ideas. I need new experiences, because those additional things are better for the company. Maybe that's more work to onboard. Maybe that's more work to try and bring people in, nurture and such. But the benefits of having different and diverse people is great for your product. And I think really the problem you would have then is if we just do a copy and paste template of everything that we've ever done. And sometimes how your company or your recruiters frame your company can be tricky, and relationships therefore with your HR people or your recruiters are vital. And being able to articulate what you want isn't really easy all the time, especially if they don't understand what the role is. I've spoken to many recruiters who don't really understand what the job is. They're just able to regurgitate what they're told about the role. And so getting face time or the words of those people out is really tricky sometimes. And how is it you can build some sort of reputation for your company and your role?
I think it's very hard to build a reputation. It's very easy to lose it. I think we talked about this a little bit with brand and things recently. I think different people get engaged by different things. So one of the things that I know I'm quite keen is reaching out to universities, reaching out to the community, getting involved with things, sponsoring events, getting a company's name within the sphere of testing to make it in a positive light, not just doing it for the sake of it, not pushing their own product or something necessarily, but the fact that they are there behind the scenes doing talks on different areas that have people that are willing to engage with the community. And those sorts of things I think are quite good. They certainly engage with me. And I think, if you're trying to attract that sort of person who wants to go to these events, wants to get engaged with those sort of exterior communities, that will work. If you want some more introverts, or if you're not looking for that sort of thing, they probably won't see that, is the honest answer. But the reputation will get out there further. More people will hear of you. You have a conversation, let's say, catch up with Chris one evening about, I've heard about this company. Chris can mention, oh yeah, I saw that they helped out with this event type thing. It helps put you in a good light, which again helps people who are good talent to think, maybe if they're investing, they're hopefully investing in me. And I have to think when I'm looking for jobs, and I think of top talent, being invested in is quite important to me. That they're willing to invest in me and not just use me. So if they'll put money into community, I see that as a good sign. And that could be, actually, I talked about sponsoring meetups, things like that, but it could be charity. It could be nothing to do with testing. Have they got a good reputation for helping in general?
Often the investment in the person as well. That's often, I know we're not talking about interviews, but there's often a question as to how much training will I get on the actual job, and that isn't always given in job ads that will invest in you. We look at you as an investment. We will help support you in those particular things. I know it can change year by year depending on exactly what's available and things like that, but we should all have an investment in ourselves, and companies have a responsibility to help support that to a certain extent. Because in the past, I have worked for companies who have promised investment and then haven't delivered. And so I had to do the ISTQB to prove myself. I had to invest in myself from those particular companies because they weren't willing to invest in it themselves. And I think that's an important thing that often isn't discussed until potentially the interview stage. And even then, it's usually driven by the candidate and not necessarily the actual company.
I think you're right. And I think sometimes job adverts, they advertise the wrong things as the perks. And actually things like that would be the perks that I would, I'm not worried about the free lunches. I'm not worried about the free fruit and the free coffee. I'd rather be told, yes, we're actually going to invest in you. You're going to get a training budget where you can invest in so many books or so many online courses or so many conferences, et cetera, per year to further yourself. Even if they put things like providing that you can apply that learning and show an improvement in yourself, or whatever the wording they want to put around it. But I would rather we see you as an investment. As you say, David, we will put this money aside for you to learn new stuff. We will give you a day a month where you can learn new things, or whatever the way they want to spin it. But for me, that's much more attractive than free coffee, free fruit, free lunches, et cetera, free beer on a Friday or whatever.
Free coffee is quite good.
Yeah, true.
True. Depends if it's good coffee, though.
Yeah, especially I'm just missing it in lockdown, I think.
Yeah. We had that in adverts for my old place where they had bean to cup coffee, and it genuinely was something that was good and I miss. as a sort of a perk. But then there were other perks that sort of like put people off that. You say, oh, it's got a pool table. And you think,
I saw one that always made me laugh. It was and it was kind of done with an exclamation mark. Death in service award. It's like, I'm not generally entering a job with the joy of knowing that I've got death in service. I understand that it's useful to have and all the rest of it, but it's not generally the make or breaker of most jobs.
It is. Yeah, you're right. It's one of those that, I'd be nice to know my family are looked after if anything happened to me while I'm working. But yeah, it's...
Well, actually, that throws a good point, actually, that when you attract great testers or when you're looking for jobs, is that different people's priorities are different. Absolutely. Some people are very money orientated, in which case death in service might be important because they want to keep their family and whatever. And other people, the investment in themselves, they feel themselves are important. So it's a fine line because obviously you've only got a certain number of words to sell your position to the actual candidates. And so therefore, what message do you want to give? Or do you have different flavors for a similar job, catering for different people?
Yeah, you're right. It is about finding that balance. But it's also about putting the right things there that's going to get people excited about working for that organization. And sometimes the big, heavy financial ones or the health benefits are not the ones that will make or break a job. They might be the ones that will secure a job as far as, I want health insurance or I want my family to be covered within health insurance. So that's a plus for me. But it's not the headline one that's going to make or break them going for the job.
Especially probably relevant when you mention some of these benefits, but you don't, for example, put the salary in the advert.
Yes, exactly.
Is it competitive, Russell?
It's always competitive.
I hate that word, competitive.
But it's competitive, and whose ballpark is another question. But
yeah,
no, you're right. Though, you have to be careful of things. I think there's some testing that you can do basically of actually the adverts to see who you get attracts to what. I think would be quite interesting. So A/B testing.
One that I've found is an obvious one that should be included, which I think every tester or every person that I've met that's taken on a new job recently has complained about to some extent, is the company should offer, we will provide you with all the technology and tools that you need to make your job effective. So if that is a particular mind mapping tool that you use, you can have that installed. Anything that you need, we will give you. And yes, there might have to be a budget. If it's financially, there's a budget attached to it, then that's different. But if there's free versions of the software entitled that means you can do your job that in the way that you're good at doing your job because you've used that tool before, then that makes that's a nice perk for someone to come in and know they've got a setup that they can work with rather than having to start from scratch completely.
I love that perk, but I've got a feeling that most security sort of teams and IT departments would detest it with a passion.
Absolutely.
Not saying they're right, by the way. I'm just saying.
Absolutely. But to be honest, the tools that we as testers use, we're not using 2-bit tools that are major security risks. We're using tools that are generally well developed, well known, well used.
Probably if there's a relationship with your IT department like that, there's probably a cultural problem within the company.
Yeah.
Anyhow, where there's a bit of trust issues.
We also do want tools like Burp Suite and other things that are for sort of intercepting things and security.
Yeah.
But then there's a reason why we do that, right?
Yeah. But that's the reason why those teams sometimes get a bit scared.
But sometimes as testers, we want to install new software. And I think that IT can help with giving admin rights in order to be able to install those things, which makes our lives easier. I know that some companies really cut down what they can do and it doesn't help testers. I know we're getting off the topic of attracting great testers, but it's not just attracting them, it's keeping them. If they're frustrated in their actual job, then they're likely to try looking elsewhere because it's stifling their creativity.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We're moving on slightly to the onboarding side of things, but if you spend the first 2 days putting requests into the service desk to get particular tools installed, that doesn't exactly motivate you when you.
And I do think the places I've worked where you have more admin access to your own computer have definitely been much more fun to work. Going back to attracting great testers, one thing I noticed we haven't mentioned is diversity and about making sure our adverts and other things are working. So we did talk about benefits that some attract different people. Actually, you're right. There's kind of like childcare and other things that can attract different demographics. Pension, these sorts of things do attract different demographics to a degree. I do think you need to make sure that your adverts, your recruitment, your policies are not just for the sake of it, not just token meeting the requirements of request to work from home or something in, that they'll review it. Actually, there are more liberal policies out there. I think that can help you look and hire people with a much more open mind, attract brighter audience.
One of the key things to attract or increase diversity is not to have too long a list of requirements.
Yeah.
Because people see them in different ways. And also it's difficult to know which ones are the top priorities. If you have a long list, there might be one thing that they have to be on it. And it's not obvious. So therefore, make sure it's tailored to the actual job, or make it broad enough to allow lots of people to apply in order to make sure that you can choose or have a lot of candidates to pick from.
You're right there. There's a lot to be said for keeping that list as succinct as possible to the main core things that you want from the job, and allowing the rest of the role to be what the person makes it.
And again, that goes back to the culture ad rather than culture fit, because you want people to have those core things, but what else can they add? Let's not stifle that.
Yes, agreed.
Let's allow them to bring their ideas, and we can then assess that.
Because there's a lot of research out there that if you put a list of, 16 bullet points to say that there's certain tools they need to have experience with, and there's certain operating systems or test automation, et cetera, it has to have all of them. Looking from a neurodiversity perspective, someone on the autism spectrum may look at that list and say, well, I only tick 15 out of 16 spaces, so I'm not going to apply for that role. Whereas actually, if there's only 4 things on that list that you crucially want, and the rest is you might be good at this, it might be a benefit if you are, there might also be some other things you're a benefit. That changes the dynamic completely, and you may find that more people will apply if there's less succinct list of things that are on there.
Hiring, though, I have to think back to recent recruitments where I've done it. There is probably only 3 high-level things I'm looking for more often than not. There's lots of things that are nice to have, but ultimately, I think I've looked for experience with Agile, experience with automation, and experience leading or experience doing something like that. I kind of try and keep it as high as that, because actually there's so much broad experience. It's hard to limit yourself. Keeping it broad is really useful.
Thinking of your own experiences then, what things make a job advert stand out for you and a company stand out for you, and what turns you off, apart from competitive salary?
Competitive salary, yeah.
I want to feel like the product is something I can get passionate about and get behind. So whatever the thing that I'm going to be working on from a test perspective, and this is why I've never gone down the consultancy contractor route, because I'd like to have one thing that I'm working towards, or one company set of products that I'm working with, rather than not knowing where I'm going next. I'd like to get behind that one product.
See, I'm completely the opposite, which is why I'm completely happy with my job, because 1 month or year to the next, we're not entirely sure what we're working on. So therefore, the variety is certainly something that attracts me.
I think you have just hit the nail on the head, the difference between contracting and non-contracting. For me, a job advert, it would have to be read quite succinctly, not be a lot of text. Dyslexia means I don't like reading large things and struggle. Talk very much about the context of the business versus a list. Give me the flavor of the company. It may not be quite true, and I'd try and find that at interview, but you'd have to give me a flavor of a place I could see myself working rather than the job. I wouldn't mind so much the product, more care that I think I can fit the culture.
Or add to it, of course.
Yeah. Well, I'd always add to it no matter what I did, but because I'm that sort of person. It's more the environment that I was working in was something which I felt could.
I think I'm thrown off by the idea of being in a separate test team, or by being in somewhere that isn't going to be trying to be some way of agile, isn't hoping to actually improve and grow and make things better. So that could be the way they use the language about quality or shift left or something along those lines. And sometimes you talked about job adverts, people taking a punt on. I think I've certainly taken a punt on job adverts that didn't look exciting, and companies that I hadn't heard anything about, because sometimes those things aren't very well written, and until you get FaceTime with people, you don't get that sort of discussion. But that can be tricky, because I'm sure a lot of really good people fall through the net as a result of those things. And where we post jobs, as well as the way that we write them, can speak to those things. Like people talk about diversity, and I'm sure we'll go into this more on a different call, but actually diversity, if you're really serious about it, there are different places you should be posting your jobs rather than just the normal tracks, the normal channels. I think that now, David, brings us to the end of this time that we've got allowed for this evening. We've had a good time calling today. We've even got a Piers pup join us, wearing a cone around his head. He looks delightful, like a lovely chocolate ice cream. So thank you for joining us this evening. We really hope you're enjoying what we're doing. If you've got any tips, feedback about anything that we're doing, then please do get in touch with us. If you've got any ideas for topics you might like us to talk about, by all means, please do get in touch. We can now be found on Twitter, Instagram, even Facebook, LinkedIn, all search for Testing Peers, you'll find us. We're at testingpeers.com. If you feel like you want to be a part of our journey and support us even more, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/testingpeers. And if no social media or Patreon appeal to you, we also have contact us at testingpeers.com. We don't have a PO box yet, but you never know. Thanks again to Saffron QA for their sponsorship and support. Otherwise, we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.